We're coming to the end of our Reset series. Thank you so much for sticking with it and for all the comments and encouragement and conversation around the themes that we've been looking at as we've explored for ourselves the big lockdown that is at the heart of the Old Testament and how God helped his people to respond to that situation and how God used it to create a great reset among his people for all that he was calling them into. We've spanned several months and many books of the Bible, and it might be easy to miss the big overall arching picture. I just want to create a couple of summaries for you to help us grasp one of the final points that I want to share with you before we leave the Reset series altogether. Different prophets, different writings in the Old Testament help the people respond in different ways because they carried different perspectives on what was happening to them. Isaiah, for example, was reminding the people that what they were facing was really tough and difficult, but that God would be with them and it would come to an end. Like Ezra and Nehemiah years later, there was this sense in which they were going to go through this period of time and then return and rebuild. Interestingly enough, I think that term rebuild is really appropriate for us as we think about the return. We're not just going back as if nothing's happened. We are going back to rebuild something that has been lost over this period of time. And so you've got these great books of the Bible, these great prophets talking like that. You're going to go through this really tough time. It will come to an end. And when it does, let's get back and rebuild. But as we've been seeing these last couple of weeks, there are other prophets, writers, and books of the Bible that are not so focused on the people who would return and rebuild, but rather these books, like Esther and Daniel, were written to those people who were learning to live where lockdown had led them. In other words, they were learning to serve God where they had found themselves as a result of the lockdown. And it's not just Esther and Daniel. To a certain extent, Ezekiel and Habakkuk and others were also saying the same thing. Don't just think about it coming to an end and getting back. Think about where God has now placed you and how you can serve him there. But that's not all. There's another theme that's been going on, and perhaps we first glimpsed it in Jeremiah and Zephaniah, and we are brought back to it now in the final book of the Bible, our final book for this series, the book of Malachi. And these guys, these writings were saying something slightly different again. They were saying it's not about it coming to an end and going back, and neither is it necessarily about learning to live where lockdown has led you. What it's really about, whether you go back or whether you stay out, what it's really about is the quality of your relationship with God. And that's where the book of the Old Testament comes to an end with the writings of Malachi. Malachi says, return to me, speaking on the Lord's behalf, return to me and I will return to you, says the Lord. It's a book about encouraging everyone to take their relationship with God seriously. Malachi would say, well, hey, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you go back, it doesn't matter whether you stay out on mission. What really matters is the quality of your relationship with God. Just like Jeremiah had said years earlier, and Zephaniah and others too. And so we see over the spread of the scriptures, there wasn't just one answer. This has happened to you, now this is what you must do. There was a whole plethora, and I've summarized it in quite a broad way. There's loads of nuances and subtleties as we've seen perhaps over the weeks. But we've seen that over these weeks there is a plethora of different perspectives on what has happened to the people and how they should now respond. And the Bible affirms all of them. And that's my first point, my first of just 2 points to leave with you at the end of this Reset series. And this is it. Number one, there were different answers. There were different answers. Different answers to how they should respond to what had happened to them and how they should behave and where they should live and react when it came to an end. The key word, I think, is and. So often we want to know, is it this or is it that? Well, in this context, it's both. You see what the prophets were saying? Should we go back and rebuild? Yes. And should we stay out where lockdown has led us to and serve God and be on mission for God and seek to influence for God there? Yes. And we ought to prioritize, make as first importance our relationship with God Himself, because that matters above all else. Can you see? It was not one or the other. It was all of it. It was a great big and. God is big enough for the return and rebuild, and God is big enough for the stay out on mission and make a difference in His world. It's all part of His kingdom purpose. And so there were different answers, and the Bible gives a great big yes to all of them. And it struck me that this might be a helpful perspective with where we are right now. All things look like we will be able on the 25th of July, 2 weeks' time, to return to services at 10:45 with music and live singing and all the things that we are normally used to. But we have we've had different lockdown experiences, and we have different perspectives. Simon, don't you realize that we're coming out of a global pandemic, and I'm not ready to be in a large group of people and to mix with everybody. I'm fearful because of what we've been through. I'm anxious about myself or my family or track and trace or whatever it might be. Absolutely. We totally get that, and we totally understand it. Equally, there are others who say, Simon, don't you realize we've been through a global pandemic, and do you know what? I can't wait to get back to a large group of people to sing my heart out and to hug everybody in sight. I can't wait for that experience because we've been through a global pandemic and I'm dying on the inside. Absolutely. That is absolutely true. At the same time, we want to affirm both answers. And just like the Old Testament left us all these different answers, and in Jewish tradition that was quite typical, and they were not told therefore what to do, but to wrestle with what God was saying to each one of them through these different perspectives. So we hold all these perspectives of our whole Burlington family together, and we will wrestle with them, we will work with them with love and grace and truth, because we understand that both perspectives are valid. So we will celebrate when we're back in the building, and we will understand those who are not ready to be there, and we will be respectful that some people will be there and will be nervous and anxious. So we will give everybody space. We will be grace-filled and kind and thoughtful and considerate, because both perspectives are true. Different answers. And the Old Testament held them in tension, and the key word was and. There are different answers to our perspectives right now, to our response right now, and we as the people of God hold them in tension and understand the power of the word and. We can be anxious about coming back, and we can celebrate coming back. Both of those perspectives are equally valid as we embrace one another. So different answers. That's my first of these final 2 points. Different answers. Let's be considerate and kind and respectful and understanding and accepting of people with different perspectives. That's what will make us a great family. Second point, different answers, same assurance. Different answers, same assurance. And that's how the book of Malachi ends. It ends with a reminder about the covenant, that we are covenantal people. God has made a covenant with us, a promise. It's not a question of where we are or what our perspective is, but it's about the promise that God has made us. It is about whose we are, that we belong to Him, whatever our perspective. Do you know what? God's got this, and God's got us. Whatever our perspectives, we can live with the same assurance. And that's where Malachi ends, calling God's people to take seriously again their relationship with Him and to know the joy and the assurance and the presence of God that's been promised to them as covenantal people, as people of the promise. And that same assurance that Malachi was talking about was to give birth to eventually. It was a long wait for sure, but it was to give birth to something altogether new that God had promised His people during their time of exile, their lockdown, their restricted living, when they were powered down and reset. God was promising them even way back then something altogether new. He says this through the prophet Ezekiel: I will give them a new heart and I will put a new spirit within them. I will do something altogether different. Hey, would you with me, as people with the same assurance, believe, stand, pray, long work, serve for the altogether different that God has for us, the new blessing, the new realities, the new opportunities that God has for us as we come out of this season and move together into a new one? Same assurance. And in fact, that theme of relationship and assurance runs right the way through. And I was reminded, and I'll just close with this, a verse in Jeremiah where it talks about the responsibility of God's people as they went through this lockdown season. Their responsibility was to return to Him wholeheartedly. That's altogether bigger and different, isn't it? It's not about returning to church or returning to one another or returning to a new normal or even to an old normal or returning to a more sustained way of life. None of that. No. Return to me wholeheartedly. And as we return to Him wholeheartedly, Malachi's promise is true, that suddenly the Lord that we're seeking will come to His temple. And we know that the Lord's temple today is not a building, but His people. The Lord will come to His people. And so we are excited and enthralled and full of anticipation of all that God will do as He powers us up afresh after this time of reset.